It was a beautiful spring day on the banks of the Potomac River on April 8, 1826, when Secretary of State Henry Clay and Senator John Randolph of Roanoke counted paces, cocked their guns, and prepared to fire at one another. The two notable American politicians were engaged in an illegal duel that, by nearly all accounts, should have never happened. So here's how this odd moment in American history that would come to be known as the duel that wasn't came to pass. In 1826, Henry Clay was one of America's most well-known politicians. Starting his career as a flamboyant Kentucky lawyer with a knack for courtroom oratory, he was elected to Kentucky's House of Representatives at only 26 years old. 3 years later, he was asked to serve as senator when the previous one resigned. He took the job in 1806 despite the fact that he didn't meet the minimum age requirement of 30. Fortunately for Clay, no one seemed to notice, including, reports say, Clay himself. He rose through the ranks to become Speaker of the House, where he advocated for the War of 1812 against Great Britain. In this role, and as Secretary of State starting in 1825, Clay became known as the Great Compromiser due to his ability to sympathize with both sides of many issues and come up with solutions that could bring two sides together. There's no better example of this than the 1820s Missouri Compromise, which admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state into the Union. Clay himself was a slave owner, but believed that slavery would die out on its own eventually, as had been the viewpoint of many of the founding fathers. John Randolph was also quite notable, but more for his erratic behavior than any political maneuvering. Born into a prominent Virginia family and a disciple of Thomas Jefferson, who was also his cousin, he believed passionately in states' rights and detested federal authority. Think a 19th century version of a libertarian. Mean, bad-tempered, insulting, and violent, historians think Randolph was an alcoholic and possibly also an opium addict. Even many of his supporters suggested that he might be insane. Today, some historians believe this behavior may have stemmed from his insecurity relating to health issues and sexual orientation, though there are accounts about him marrying a woman. It has been speculated that he suffered from Klinefelter syndrome. Those with this condition are usually considered and identify as male, but have an extra chromosome, making them XXY, which, among other things, interferes with sexual development. Whether he really had this condition or not, it's noted that Randolph was unable to grow a beard and had a very high-pitched voice, not unlike a prepubescent male. Due to his boyish traits, at one point Congressman Willis Aston referred to Randolph as a puppy, resulting in Randolph attacking Alston with a cane right there in the Capitol building. Given how badly he bloodied up Alston, today this would have seen Randolph serving time in prison. At the time, however, he was merely given a small fine of about $20, which is about $300 today. A lifelong bachelor, one biographer speculated that Randolph had nurtured a crush on Andrew Jackson, another famous short-tempered individual in American history. For instance, before becoming president, Jackson once killed a man for simply calling Jackson a worthless scoundrel, a poltroon, and a coward. In another incident, while president, one Richard Lawrence attempted to assassinate Jackson, but his guns misfired. The enraged president subsequently began beating Lawrence furiously with a cane until people nearby had to pull Jackson off him. In any event, it's amazing. In any event, it was during a debate on executive powers in the Senate on March 30th, 1826, that Randolph went off on a rant that was all too familiar to many in attendance. In the crosshairs of his insults were President John Quincy Adams and Secretary of State Clay. Accusing both of manufacturing evidence to support America's participation in the Congress of Panama, he called them corrupt, unscrupulous, and immoral. Going further, he personally attacked them both by saying they were Puritan with the blackleg, an epithet that was a reference to an 18th century novel, and it defined them as a dishonest card cheat. If that wasn't enough, he took a shot at Clay's forebears, saying that they should be held responsible for bringing into the world this being, brilliant yet so corrupt, which like a rotten mackerel by moonlight shined and stunk. And apparently, back in the 1800s, they were rather creative with their insults. As expected, all of this, it greatly upset Clay, who was a prideful person himself. However, there was a tradition of the day that words spoken during a congressional session by a congressman or a senator, even if they were of the utmost insult, could not be used to incite a duel. This was essential in order to keep senators and congressmen from having to frequently fight in duels with their peers in a period where a choice insult against a gentleman of honor would sometimes require the defending of that honor via a duel. Because of this tradition, Randolph thought that he could say these things without any serious consequence. But Clay, he did not see it this way. It's unclear if Clay ignored the tradition or thought that Randolph had somehow waived this so-called special privilege in some way, but, well, he challenged the senator to a duel anyway. At this point, Randolph could have reminded Clay of this privilege and not accepted the duel and still saved face. But fortunately for making this story rather interesting, he did not do that. Instead, he accepted the duel and then widely complained that Clay was out of line in challenging him in the first place. Despite supporters on both sides trying to convince both distinguished gentlemen to back down, they set the duel date for April 8th, 1826. This wasn't Clay's first foray into dueling. 17 years earlier, Clay was called a liar by Humphrey Marshall on the floor of the Kentucky House of Representatives. To defend his honor, Clay challenged him to a duel. The two Kentuckians met at Silver Creek, where it empties into the Ohio River. Marshall was grazed on the first shot, but Clay was severely wounded in the thigh by the third shot. Bleeding profusely, he insisted the duel continue, but his aides and Marshall both said enough. Clay, of course, he went on to recover. Despite accepting the challenge and his harsh words against Clay, Randolph never had any intention of hurting him. The only reason he agreed to the duel was out of principle. He privately told friends that he had an entire unwillingness to make a widower of Mrs. Clay. In fact, he assured fellow Senator Thomas Hart Benton, in tones as sweet as women's own, do nothing on the morrow to disturb the sleep of the child or the repose of the mother. You see, despite his own promises not to harm Clay, Randolph wasn't positive that Clay would return the favor. As such, during negotiations in regards to the duel, Randolph asked for it to take place on Virginia soil as opposed to Washington, D.C. or Maryland, because if he was going to die, he wanted to die in his home state, even though it was illegal to duel in Virginia at the time. The Clay camp accepted this request despite Virginia's laws. As for Clay, it's not clear to date what he was thinking in the days leading up to the duel, though it isn't thought that he knew of Randolph's private vow to not harm him in the duel. At 4 p.m. on the Virginia side of the Potomac, in today's Arlington, the two men stood apart from each other. Each of them had brought a surgeon in case of injury. Randolph confidently assured his men that he could tell that Clay was calm and not vindictive, and he did not see the devil in his eye. Counting off paces, it was either 10 or 30, accounts differ, they turned to face one another. Then, all of a sudden, a gun went off. It was Randolph's, an accidental discharge due to a hair trigger in his bulky gloves. Luckily, it was pointed towards the ground. A bit spooked, they agreed to dismiss the accident and count off again. The word was then given, and both turned and shot. Randolph's first shot was wild, as he'd promised. On the other hand, Clay's shot was somewhat true, putting a sizable hole through Randolph's intentionally massively oversized overcoat. Realizing that his opponent had come only inches from seriously wounding and perhaps killing him, Randolph decided to broadcast his peaceful intentions and shot his second bullet harmlessly into the air. Seeing this, Clay called off the duel. Both men walked back to the middle, shook hands, but not before a few more words were exchanged. Clay, rather apologetically, reportedly told Randolph, "I trust in God, my dear sir, you are untouched. After what has occurred, I would not have harmed you for 1,000 words." Always sharp-tongued, Randolph motioned to his coat and answered dryly, "You owe me a new coat, Mr. Clay." Clay reportedly responded, "I am glad the debt is no greater." Henry Clay went on to become a defining figure in 19th century American political history. He became a senator again and ran for president several times. He actually helped pull the country back from the brink of civil war. He died in 1852. 13 years later, the deadliest conflict in American military history broke out. John Randall of Roanoke, he actually preferred this add-on to his name, was appointed to be the minister to Russia by President Andrew Jackson in 1830. 3 years later, he died of what was reported to be tuberculosis, but findings contend that he was drinking heavily and engaging in heavy opium use at the time of his death. To this day, no one knows if Clay purchased Randolph a new coat. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up below and don't forget to subscribe. We've got brand new videos like this, well, sometimes. They're not really quite on a schedule yet, so hit that notification bell so you do find out when we put these out. Leave us a comment, let us know how we're doing. This is a relatively new channel, so it'd be good to hear from you. And as always, thank you for watching.